So, over the long weekend, I kept seeing a video circulating around social media, on Instagram and Twitter.
It's certainly critical to my state, and that's why we fought off these 12 lawsuits. We had them in Houston, we had them in San Antonio, we had them in Austin, we had them in the counties where you'd have the most liberal judges. And it was a concerted effort nationally with lots of money going into it. And just knowing that we had 12 lawsuits that we had to win. And if we had lost one of them, like if we lost Harris County, Trump won by 620,000 votes in Texas. Harris County mail-in ballots that they wanted to send out were 2.5 million. Those were all illegal, and we were able to stop every one of them.
That was freshly impeached Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton on Steve Bannon's podcast, admitting to what appears to be a deliberate attempt to interfere with a local election in Houston in 2020.
Had we not done that, we would have been in the very same situation. We would have been on election night. I was watching election night, and I knew when I saw what was happening in these other states that would have been Texas. We would have been in the same boat. We would have been one of those battleground states that they were counting votes in Harris County for 3 days, and Donald Trump would have lost the election.
People are upset about it. They want to know if Texas voters actually did finally flip from red to blue, but Republican interference stopped it from happening. They want to know how many Republicans we have in office here in Texas who would have actually been defeated by their Democratic challengers without possible Republican tampering. They want to know why Ken Paxton isn't being prosecuted for election interference on top of all of his other pending legal and political battles. And people are wondering why this wasn't a bigger story at the time it came out, because this video is from 2 years ago in 2021. And I keep telling my mother and my boyfriend nobody listens to me. Here is a clip from a video I did for Rebel HQ in July 2022, so almost a year ago. Attorney General Ken Paxton, who, by the way, spoke at the January 6th rally and was just arrested for securities fraud, told Steve Bannon on his podcast, quote, "Had we not done that, we would have been one of those battleground states that were counting votes in Harris County for 3 days. Trump would have lost the election in Texas." Now, by the time I even mentioned this in my Rebel HQ video, it was already old news. I know I don't have the largest platform in the world, so I'm not trying to flatter myself here, but the fact of the matter is that this was a state-level public servant on a public podcast blatantly bragging about interfering in a local election. And then nothing came of it. It barely garnered significant headlines at the time, at least not from what I can recall. But what's interesting is how relevant that video that I did a year ago is today. In my video, I discuss what it's like to be a blue county in a red state, and I was talking specifically about Harris County in Texas. If you've been keeping up with my last few videos, or if you've just been watching the news, you'll know that Harris County has been capturing national headlines lately because the Texas state legislature just passed a few bills that would allow the state to interfere in Harris County elections.
We've seen an all-out attack on local control from every major elected official in the state of Texas, aimed at the increasingly diverse counties with increasingly diverse leadership. Republican lawmakers in Austin are pushing bills that block mayors from making decisions that best suit the needs of their constituents. They're pushing bills that pave the way to remove local elected officials like prosecutors, judges, and of course, our tax assessor collector and our clerk from office. And they're pushing bills to make it harder to vote in this state.
This is understood to be in direct retaliation to what went on in Houston during the 2020 election, the same election that Paxton is referring to in this now viral clip. In response to the recent bills, the Harris County attorney, Christian Menefee, is taking legal action.
Enough is enough. We're filing this lawsuit to protect our communities, to protect our public servants, and to protect each and every resident that lived in Harris County and cast their ballot for folks who look differently and think differently than the people in Austin.
Now, in my Rebel HQ video where I mentioned Paxton's comments, I actually interviewed Menefee regarding his ongoing work as our Democratic county attorney, constantly fighting with the state-level Republican leadership. It's all kind of coming full circle now, but it's interesting to see how, even in our modern age, when we regularly consume major news stories via 30-second TikTok videos, these stories are complex, they have lasting repercussions, and they can drag out for years at a time. And for the record, this thing with the mail-in ballots, Harris County election officials were trying to figure out ways to make voting easier and safer for Houstonians during the 2020 election, which took place at the height of the pandemic. They wanted to send out mail-in ballot applications, which are distinct from actual mail-in ballots, to Houston's registered voters, about 2.4 to 2.5 million of them, giving them the option to cast their ballots without having to risk exposure to COVID at a polling location. Houstonians still would have had to submit the applications for approval to vote by mail. The state blocked the initiative. The state, as Paxton said in the clip, viewed the county's initiative as illegal, but that's kind of a weak claim. The state guarantees mail-in voting to voters over the age of 65, but anyone else has to apply for a mail-in ballot. Again, the county was sending out applications for ballots, not ballots themselves. Whether or not those applications would have been approved, and whether or not they should have been approved given the extenuating circumstances of the pandemic, is another story, but we never got to that point. So it's maybe a stretch to say that Trump would have definitely won Texas if Harris County had been allowed to send out the applications. In the interview, Paxton seemed to be confusing ballot applications for ballots themselves, and while it is apparently an instance of election interference, and while the AG's motives are admittedly politically motivated and highly partisan, he is, after all, an election denier, he is discounting the fact that Houstonians still found a way to vote. Maybe not as many of us voted than would have had we all been given those ballot applications, but we just don't know that for sure. Either way, Houston still voted blue in 2020, along with the other major cities in the state: Dallas, Austin, San Antonio, and El Paso. I think maybe the reason why it's fascinating to me that this Paxton video is resurfacing now is that at the time it came out, we just had too much going on. In 2021, who could keep up with every insane thing that came out in the news, with every unhinged confession that happened on a podcast? It speaks to the media/political strategy of inundating people with so many horrific headlines that people either can't keep track of them all, or they get overwhelmed by everything and disconnect from the news entirely. Can't blame them for doing so, but the sad, albeit the often intended result of all of this content is that significant headlines get lost and buried in the muck, and the people were just too distracted to notice. Paxton on his own had some notable headlines both before and after the 2020 election, including one where he was suing Pennsylvania, Georgia, Michigan, and Wisconsin to challenge their 2020 election results. He made headlines again when he went to D.C. to speak on January 6th. He made headlines previously for abusing the powers of his office. Last week, he set a dumpster on fire outside of his office, and over the weekend, he was impeached by the Texas House following an investigation into his years of misconduct. Now, on that note, Ken Paxton is currently suspended from office, with an acting attorney general set to be appointed by the Texas governor. Paxton will go to trial in the Texas Senate later this year to determine whether or not he'll officially be removed from office. And hopefully, I won't have to talk about him for a while. All right, that's it for me. If you got anything out of this, please like and subscribe, and be sure to follow me on Instagram and TikTok. Thank you.